Shabbat Shalom. I would like to ask a question. There's so much talk about the pandemic and COVID and so on and so forth, and you got to start wondering, is it COVID itself that causes the spread, or is it the pandemic that causes the spread? What I mean to say by this question, I don't mean to get too philosophical, but what I mean to say is as follows. Is it the scientific end of the disease that's causing the spread of the disease itself, or is there a pandemic that's going on? And because there's a pandemic in the world, therefore the disease itself spreads more quickly. Now, I know you might think that I'm crazy by even asking this kind of question, like, what do you mean to say there's a pandemic and that's why the disease spreads quickly? In other words, if there wasn't a pandemic around the world, then the disease will spread slowly. In other words, what I'm saying is, if this was an isolated case, would the disease spread slower? And because we made this into a worldwide pandemic, that's why it's spreading quicker? You might think that I'm crazy by asking this question, but I'm not so crazy, because in this week's Torah portion, actually, they discuss this concept. And it says as follows: when there is a danger looming around our lives, then the Satan comes and causes more trouble. An interesting concept. Meaning to say that when there's no danger around, in other words, in our lives, then the Satan has a more difficult time causing us trouble. So in other words, based on this concept, we might argue that only in the time when there is a pandemic can a trouble become stronger, become worse. And if there is no larger trouble in our lives, then there's a less of a chance of a problem coming our way. And that is why we generally try not to put ourselves into danger's way, so that dangerous things should not happen to our lives. So for example of this will be, driving a car is a dangerous activity, and therefore to make sure that dangerous things don't happen to us while we drive a car, we put on a seatbelt to protect ourselves from a dangerous activity. Now, obviously, the more dangerous the situation is, the more protective we have to be. And that is why, whether or not somebody believes in the dangers of COVID or not, because there's a pandemic in the world, therefore you must take the precautious steps and be safe, whether or not you believe in the effectiveness or the problems of COVID or not. So in other words, whether you believe in the science of COVID or not, you still have to be careful. That's just a general concept. What to talk about in this week's Torah? So we have a very interesting conversation that goes on, and here's what it says. The Torah tells a beautiful, interesting story. This is a very famous story of how Joseph now is the king in Egypt. The brothers do not know about it. Jacob does not know about this. And Joseph is playing hardball. And he tells the brothers, says, look, you have a younger brother named Benjamin back up in Israel, land of Israel. I am not going to let your brother Shimon out of jail until you bring Benjamin down to Egypt. Now, when they go to their father Jacob and say, this is what the king of Egypt, the viceroy of Egypt, they don't know his name, Joseph, is saying at this time, we have to bring Benjamin down. What happens? Jacob says, I don't want to allow Benjamin to come. Why? Because traveling, especially in the olden days, travel is a dangerous activity. And I don't want to let him go down, especially keeping in mind that his brother Joseph was killed on the road. His mother, Rachel, died on the road. And therefore, he is prone to have troubles on the road. And therefore, I don't want Benjamin to go. Why? Because not only is traveling itself dangerous, traveling for this family in particular, his mother and his brother had troubles on the road. I don't want him to go. So see this idea that when we have a general concept of danger, and specifically for this family, this kid Benjamin is prone to have troubles on the road. Now, here's the interesting thing. The brothers know the truth. Joseph did not die on the road. They caused him trouble, right? They sold him to slavery. And also we know that even their mother, Rachel, did Rachel die on the road because she was on the road, or did she die on the road for two different reasons? A, she died on childbirth. But why did she die in childbirth? Because there's a bigger story, there's a background story. Her husband, Jacob, not knowing that she hid the idols of her father, Laban, Jacob cursed her. Not knowing that it's her, he cursed. Whoever stole the idols of her father, Laban, should be cursed. And that's why she died on the road. So it's not the road itself that caused the curse, but an outside circumstance. So both of these reasons, both Joseph and Rachel, were really, technically speaking, not really cursed by the road itself. And by the way, this is why the brothers try to convince their father out of this, saying that it was not a pandemic of a road issue, but something else, other circumstances. So they really convince their father without actually trying to spill their beans, saying what it is. But this is what they try to argue, saying that we'll take responsibility, knowing in their own hearts that it was not the road that was the trouble. But I think here's an interesting lesson for us all. And that is that this concept that trouble could befall us, even if they only had two circumstances, not many circumstances, but only two circumstances, that's enough to tell us that we have to be careful in our lives. And I think this is pertinent to us in our lives today. We have to be careful, and we have to know that whether or not we are concerned in our own personal belief systems, whether you do think something, you don't think something, is totally irrelevant. When the world is suffering, when there is a sakana, when there is danger looming in the world, we have to know that the Satan is playing his hand, and we have to be careful. And that is, I think, a lesson for us all. The main thing is that the light of Hanukkah that we just finished this holiday season should stay with us and illuminate our lives and illuminate the world around us. And we should merit that this disease should leave our lives, and we should ultimately be blessed with happiness and success. And as the secular year comes to an end, so should this pandemic come to an end, and we should only see happiness and blessings in our lives. Shabbat Shalom.